Chronic migraine is 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. It's not for adults with migraine with 14 or fewer headache days a month. It prevents, on average, 8 to 9 headache days a month versus 6 to 7 for placebo.
Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Ask your doctor and visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
American Giant makes great clothing. T-shirts, jeans, and more right here in the U.S., creating jobs in towns and cities across the country. Support America's workers and get 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com with code STAPLE20.
Hello and welcome to the Paddock and The Pavilion with me, your host, Stephen Wallace. I hope you've enjoyed our recent episodes on Australian racing. Today we're taking a leap across the Atlantic to the US as we turn our focus to City of Troy's upcoming run at the Breeders' Cup Classic set for Saturday, November the 2nd at Del Mar. Joining me today is award-winning American horse racing journalist and author Jay Hovdey. He'll give his opinion on City of Troy's chances, along with insights on his probable opponents. Jay is joined by an array of UK racing experts who'll give their thoughts on the chances of Aidan O'Brien's Derby winner. The big question is, can City of Troy succeed where all previous O'Brien champions have fallen short on American dirt in the Breeders' Cup Classic? Stay tuned to hear our expert analysis and predictions. Hello, Jay. Welcome back to the Paddock and the Pavilion.
Stephen, it's great to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's April 2023, episode 191, when we spoke about America's Horse Secretariat.
Yes, we did. And of course, Secretariat's a topic that is evergreen. And certainly that was appropriate last year. But now we're on to bigger and more exciting things of contemporary nature.
Yes, today we are going to talk about the Breeders' Cup Classic and City of Troy's bid for glory at Del Mar on the 2nd of November. As well as yourself, Jay, I've got 5 other guests. I've got a leading racing historian, a trainer, 2 TV presenters, and a Racing Post bloodstock journalist. But to start with, I'd like to open up by asking you about the history of the Breeders' Cup Classic and the Breeders' Cup, really, just in general. How did it come about? Whose idea was it?
Oh, my word, back to the beginning. Well, John Gaines is a very prominent Kentucky breeder who was a man brimming with ideas, both in his breeding and his business life. And he's looked at the American racing landscape and decided that racing was getting the short shrift in terms of attention once the Triple Crown was finished in June, and thought that it deserved a late season spectacular extravaganza of competition on a par with a Super Bowl or a World Series or any of the other climactic sporting events that were on the landscape at the time. So he gathered together a group of like-minded individuals, and the Breeders' Cup was born. First nominations were taken, and I believe it was sometime around late 82 or early 83 in anticipation of the first Breeders' Cup that was going to take place at Hollywood Park, right here in our backyard in California in 1984. Happened to be on my birthday. So I thought that was a very appropriate way to begin the event.
So there's no chance they started the Breeders' Cup on your birthday? just because it was your birthday?
I like to think they did, but I wasn't consulted. But it was a matter of record, so perhaps that was actually the Breeders' Cup scheduling has bounced around quite within a period of 3 or 4 weeks sometimes because of competition on television. It's always necessary for the NBC broadcast to find a slot that is the least competitive in a very competitive time of year, what with football and even a late World Series. So this year, very neatly tucked into the first 2 days of November, and off we'll go.
Has the Breeders' Cup Classic, the race, become more and more important?
It was important from the beginning. With the amount of money that was being offered at $3 million, and it's now, of course, up to $7 million, it was a target from the beginning. It was intended to be that culmination of both the best 3-year-olds and the best older horses gathering together at the 1.25 mile distance at a first-class racetrack in front of a huge crowd with national television. It had all those ingredients put together. The rest of the program was put together as very great supporting events. With the all the divisions accounted for. It's expanded, of course, from the initial 7 races to now 14 races, for goodness sakes. But we've got just about everything covered now, except horses that run backwards or clockwise.
Was it always the plan to move the meeting around various courses?
Very definitely, with the attendant, very competitive bidding processes where various racetrack managements would present themselves to the powers that be at the Breeders' Cup, the site selection committee, and make their case year after year. And it was a great white puff of smoke when it was announced each time that which racetrack would be blessed with the next Breeders' Cup or 2 years down the road. Del Mar's been very fortunate lately to become a very popular host for the Breeders' Cup, not only this year, but we'll be back next year. So it's the rotation has changed through the years with different iterations of racetracks. There is no Gulfstream Park available anymore because it's been, I would say, dumbed down into a very small racing facility for fans. The experiments at Texas, Lone Star Park, Woodbine in Canada, Monmouth Park, to smaller venues, or let's say venues that are out of the traditional rotation. They had success in a variety of ways, all 3 impacted heavily by weather, as was Chicago, which was a wonderful venue if it hadn't been so darn cold at Arlington Park that year. But now it's kind of settled into Santa Anita, Del Mar, Keeneland, with Churchill Downs sort of on the outside looking in lately, but we'll be back there, I'm sure, for a Breeders' Cup. And on the horizon, very excitingly, is the new Belmont Park, which, fingers crossed, will be a site for the Breeders' Cup more than once before the end of this decade.
Focusing on the Breeders' Cup Classic, who would you say have been the most famous winners of the race?
Well, personal prejudice will have to win out here. My 2 favorites will always be Cigar, winning in 1995 to culminate his undefeated season of 10 wins and 10 major stakes that year. And of course, Zenyatta in 2009 at Santa Anita Park, when she beat a pretty darn good field of males to remain undefeated. The reaction to those 2, both in terms of the fan reaction, the meaning of those races in the records of those 2 horses as the pinnacle of their careers, and of course those 2 horses being 2 of the handful of really instantly recognizable racing personalities in North America over the past 3 decades made those two my most memorable. But there have been, many that, goodness sakes, how can you get past Tisnow winning back to back and beating European titans, Saki and Giants Causeway. And, I was, of course, there that day that Ferdinand and Alysheba, two Kentucky Derby winners, went at it. That's separated by a nose at the end of the mile and a quarter of the Breeders' Cup in 1987. So, too many to really give good credit to, but those would be the ones that really stand out in my mind.
We also had Flightline winning by a record distance in 2022.
Well, but Flightline was Flightline. He was going to win doing anything, anytime, anywhere. The fleeting comet of a racehorse we didn't get to see nearly enough of, but we were lucky to have seen what we did. He was a special animal. The Breeders' Cup Classic just happened to get in the way. He was going to be superior no matter where he appeared.
I thought you might mention Cigar because you wrote a book about Cigar.
I did. I had the privilege of writing a biography about Cigar and his people. It was a very enjoyable project. We undertook it the year after his first Horse of the Year campaign, and so it was a great it was a great victory lap for him to take the following year, 1996, when he went far afield to Dubai to win the World Cup, and I was able to include that in most of his 1996 campaign in his biography as well. The book came out late that year.
We've also had some overseas winners. Yeah,
well, two. One of them, of course, Ravens Pass. A very colt of great quality, winning on synthetic at Santa Anita. And then the outlier of all time, Arcon, who came over from France, Andre Fabre, and in very modest form at the time, although he had won the Prix d'Espagne earlier in the year. Bertrando, our handicap champion that year, who was, won a lot of good races, gone back and forth across the country, and was rightfully favored for that race that day. I mean, he looked home and dry at the 8th bull, and then from out of nowhere came this horse that had everyone checking their programs to see who he was. And turns out he was a horse that was going to light the tote board at over $200 and drop everyone's jaw, and including the jockey Jerry Bailey, who didn't know anything about the horse, couldn't communicate with the trainer, and just recently has figured out how to pronounce his name.
Of course, we could have an overseas winner this year, but we're going to talk about that later. But it's now time for our first guest, Tim Cox. He's a leading racing historian and the owner of the Cox Library. And Tim's going to talk about our Derby winners' connections to the United States. Tim, Derby winners have a long association with America.
They certainly have, Stephen. The first Derby winner, Diomed, who won in 1780, the very first Derby, was owned by Sir Charles Bunbury, was a very good racehorse in its time, raced till he was about 7 or 8, then went to stud, but proved pretty unsuccessful at stud. So in 1798, at the age of 21, he was bought by an American and exported to the US. In the US, he turned out to be a fantastic sire. He founded, through his son Sir Archie, a stallion line that went through Lexington, and Lexington himself was a champion sire for 16 years, 14 of them consecutive. So you could almost say the strength of American racehorses came from the very first Derby winner.
You can't go back any further than that, really, can you?
You can't. And since then, 31 of the Derby winners have been exported to the US, some with success. But so 31 stallions have eventually been exported.
Who of those would have been the most successful?
I would think, just looking down the list, I suppose my favourite horse, because it was the first one that I saw in a championship race, was Nijinsky. And Nijinsky, for me, stands out amongst all the Derby winners that did go to America. But that's a personal choice.
Concentrating on those that have run in America, how successful have they been?
Some success, I would say, Stephen. In the whole history of the Derby, there have been 244 Derby winners, with City of Troy being the latest. Of those 244, only 7 will have, if City of Troy does run, only 7 Derby winners will have actually run in the US. And that's with some success. The first horse that Derby winner that raced in America was Papyrus, and he was in an individual match in 1923. He was racing against the Kentucky Derby winner at Belmont in a match that had been organised for $100,000, which was about £20,000 in those days. It was the biggest purse of that time. And if we read all the newspaper reports, Papyrus had all the meticulous arrangements for his travel, a padded box, and if the liner had sunk, his box would have floated. The insurance, the feed that came from Newmarket, the water was Newmarket water, everything to seemed to be meticulous. But when it came to the race, the track was muddy. The shoes that he wore were his normal racing plates. He didn't have the American cleats or corks attached, the studs that made it easier to run. So he didn't do particularly well. The next winner to go over, Derby winner, was Saraiva, and he won the Washington DC International. It's famously said, when did Lester Piggott think he'd won the race? And he said last month. It's whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it was a famous win. And then the next runner, that was in 1968. It was then 2001, and Galileo went over, and he finished 6th. After that, we've had High Chaparral, who won twice in 2002 and 2003, and Auguste Rodin, who finished first last year. In between, Golden Horn had finished second to the O'Brien horse Found, who went on to win the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe the following year. So some mixed fortunes for Derby winners. I think the significant difference between them is that the wins have come on turf. The two failures or semi-failures are Papyrus on dirt and Galileo, as I said, who finished 6th behind Tisnow. So it's an exciting prospect to have City of Troy racing in the Breeders' Cup Classic, but it is on dirt, and we've got to see how he handles that track. I think he had his preparation race at Southwell, just as Galileo did. There's been a change of surface at Southwell. It was fibrous sand, which is closer to the American dirt. It's now tappeta. although they drilled it a lot deeper than normal, it's still not the equivalent of the American dirt track. So I think all the preparations will be made. We just have to see how City of Troy handles the dirt.
How do you find that? Good?
Yes, that was fascinating, and brought back some very entertaining immediate memories of High Chaparral. His two wins. One of them was, of course, a dead heat with Johar from California. And, of course, Sir Ivor, those of my generation grew up with the fascination for the Washington, D.C. International. And we started learning a lot about British and European form with a horse like that coming over to win the International. And those were very enlightening pieces of history that we could cling to and fancy ourselves being very sophisticated in our knowledge of overseas racing, because we knew all about these horses now with the International and ventures like Sir Ivor.
The connection between America and Derby winners goes back a long way, doesn't it?
Well, the Zev Papyrus match race was a fascinating. We're talking about some of the great one-on-one boxing matches of all time. It was, of course, horse racing was a major sport in those days in America. There was no professional football to speak of. There was collegiate football and there was baseball, and that's about it. Boxing and horse racing, and this international promotion was touted to the high heavens. It was very exciting. It was a huge crowd that turned out that day in New York, and the movements of the two horses were followed diligently leading into that race. And it was a shame that the track came up so poorly that day. But hey, it's horse racing. We play it outdoors.
Let's hope that they don't get that rain on the 2nd of November at Del Mar. Well,
I suppose we have in the past. I haven't done that research, but there's not a cloud in the sky today, and I think we can hold that for a couple of weeks. It's actually going to be about 80 degrees, 75 at the beach today, so I'm not too worried about the weather. I would think that City of Troy's concerns would be other than the weather.
Yes, let's focus more on City of Troy's chances of winning the race. I've got two short clips for you, Jay. The first one is from Leonna Mayor. She's a ITV and Sky Sports presenter and a former jockey. And then I've got Callum Helliwell, who's a Sky Sports presenter, and both of them gave us their thoughts on City of Troy's chances of winning on Saturday, the 2nd of November. So let's hear from them.
My views are, I think Aidan is very good at it. I think it's very interesting that they took him over to Studle for that racecourse gallop here, and obviously more so for having him out the stalls with a bell. I think that's all great preparation and shows real kind of, pre-thought. I know that everyone that's taken horse over there is pre-thinking, but really, to a lot of cost, to a lot of work. I wasn't impressed with the gallop in the sense of, because he didn't need to be. He wasn't there to do a flat out gallop. It was the stall situation they wanted to work on. The fact that he's practiced all of that, I think, is a huge positive. And the one thing he does have in his favour, which, we've sent plenty of horses over there over the years, and they kind of fell out of the stalls, or they just can't quite go that very early gallop, because in America, we know they just go end to end flat out, and it's whoever's still in the front at the end or whoever gets to the front at the end. They race very fast. Kitty of Troy does race like that, so that is really a perfect scenario. He's been quite keen. He was quite keen in the Drummond International. The few times we've seen him, he does jump very well and he travels well. I thought when he won at Sandown in the Coral Eclipse, he raced quite keenly. So the real positive is, I don't think we'll get any of that. There's no way he's going to be able to be keen because they just go far too quick. But then that would just, for me, is going to play absolutely into his hands. I think if he jumps and sits third, if he jumps and sits seventh, I really don't think it will matter. I think he's going to jump and he'll travel through smoothly through through the race. And I mean, I've just got up his runs there. I mean, the majority, I suppose, the slight concern up until last time, he'd been running on good ground, good to soft ground. I mean, it's what kind of ground they get, whether he appreciates the surface. But I mean, we've seen him on every surface here, haven't we? We've seen him on the good, we've seen him on the good stuff, seen him on the good to firm. It would have been more interesting, obviously, for over in America, depending on what they do and how long he stays out there. If Sutherland stayed to the fibre sand. I mean, I enjoyed the fibre sand because I rode loads of winners there. But obviously they pulled it up and it's not quite that anymore. So I was quite surprised they went there still, it not being the fibre sand, because you assume that is why you'd have gone there in previous years, because it's your closest thing to dirt, isn't it? But yeah, I wouldn't, I'm not going to say, he's going to go over there and win, because I don't, some of the American horses I don't know in depth enough, but I'd be very shocked if he doesn't go very close.
What are City of Troy's chances of Breeders' Cup Classic glory?
Very high. I am very much in the club that I think if it was any other year, I'd probably say no. But the current class of 3-year-olds in America are not strong. I mean, fierceness only just got up last time out and just repelled Sierra Leone on the start before that, and that was over Sierra Leone's shorter trip. So I imagine back over a mile and a quarter, Sierra Leone will be more dangerous to fierceness. Torpedo Anna probably won't be in this, which will probably help fierceness. But there's just not too much depth at that division. The fact that Forever Young, the Japanese runner who was last seen winning on the dirt in Japan, has been winning in Saudi Arabia and Dubai as well, and came very close to winning a Kentucky Derby. The fact that he's there at about third favourite really suggests where the sort of race is in terms of depth. Arthur's Ride has suddenly found himself in the betting after winning a Whitney as well. So it really doesn't seem like the strongest field. And to me, City of Troy is a monster. I think he is bred to be able to do this job. And the frightening prospect is he could be a better dirt horse than he is a turf horse. We already know how good a turf horse he is. I was at the Gallop at Southwell, and I know everyone will tell me, was it like dirt? And there were a load of other things, but he showed enough early speed to keep a bunch of sprinters in his sights, and then obviously showed that beautiful stride and that beautiful bouncy action all the way down the Southwell Straight and put everything to the sword. Of course, it was conditions to make him look very good, but his maturity levels, how he handled all the prelims, I don't think he'll have any issues going through the motions in America for this race. I don't know whether Del Mar will quite suit. That's my only concern. That line will come up pretty quick at Del Mar in the straight, and he's not going to be bang up there early. So Ryan's going to need to be at his masterful best to be able to not only find a theme, but actually get through that theme and get there in time. So that would be the way I'm looking at it. I think City of Troy has an opportunity here that he wouldn't get in many other years and many other renditions of this Breeders' Cup Classic. I love the fact that they're going for it. I love the fact that they've avoided the arc in the mud that we saw last week. So hopefully a fast dirt surface will be absolutely what he's been crying out for, being by Justify. So that beautiful line from the dam side as well. Just looking forward to seeing how it goes, really. Hopefully he'll be able to get in front. But I will tell you this. If he does win, Stephen, there has to be a conversation that occurs that says, is he the greatest of all time? And I know a lot of people will be very upset about that statement, but Frankel didn't go overseas. See the Stars did go overseas, but did that on turf. If you've got this horse that can do a Derby, Eclipse, and whatever else he's done, and then go on the dirt and win a Breeders' Cup Classic in America, in their backyard, on a proper dirt surface, because I know we have had a European Breeders' Cup winner, but that was on a synthetic surface, back on a dirt surface. He has to be in the conversation of the greatest we've ever seen, simply because no other horse has done it. It will be a huge ask. He's far too short at the moment, 2-1 in places. Absolutely wouldn't go anywhere near him at that price, because you've got no idea how he'll act. But he's got a cracking chance, and looking forward to seeing how he gets on.
Some strong opinions there from Callum.
Yes, well, that's That's why we have horses and horse racing, to find out if those strong opinions carry any weight at all. From this side of the pond, we haven't really caught on to the rush to judgment about City of Troy being the greatest thing since Pegasus. We certainly gained a growing appreciation of Frankel through his career, and the more we saw of him separating himself so easily from horses at shorter distances, mile and toward the end of mile and furlong, good horses, year after year, race after race, we saw something in him that we hadn't seen before. Also in the way he moved and, just the entire package. We were ready to say that he was one of the greatest we'd ever seen, even from our vantage point. We longed to have him come over here for, if nothing else, the Breeders' Cup Mile, but certainly he would have been a great addition to a Breeders' Cup Classic in his 3 or 4 year old years, but didn't happen. I remember the hoopla surrounding Dancing Brave when he came over for something as routinely in his abilities as the Breeders' Cup Turf of 1986 at Santa Anita, and he was heralded as the best horse in a generation, one of the greatest of all time. Certainly his time form ratings and the horses he beat in the Arc de Triomphe that year endorsed that viewpoint. And he was a poor fourth in a race that he should have galloped in, Breeders' Cup Turf. So, I think we're hearing with City of Troy a lot of advertising. We're hearing a lot of hubris. We're hearing a lot of unproven speculation, which is the nature of speculation, I suppose. And I think that to anoint him as one of the greatest, perhaps the greatest of all time, if he happens to win a 1.25 mile dirt race in Southern California at the end of his 3-year-old career against poor 3-year-old competition and modest older horses, is taking it maybe a bridge too far.
So do you agree that the potential opposition is a lower standard than it has been in other years?
The Breeders' Cup Classic has not been a real deep race for several years, and that is because in this country we are chewing up our 3-year-old talent mercilessly in the race to the Kentucky Derby each year. And by the time the 3-year-old crop gets to the summer, they are spent for the most part, and we have to rely on these late developing 3-year-olds to carry the ball the rest of the way. Horses like an Arrogate that come along later in the year to pick up the spirits of that division and carry it into the Breeders' Cup Classic. But the recent winners, Nixco and Guadabario, they're nice, solid, modest, middle distance horses. Their best races are at 1.1 miles usually. And they just happen to be in the right place at the right time, in the right crop of horses to run against when the Breeders' Cup at 1.25 miles came around. So if City of Troy had been, racing through the mid 90s, say, when the Breeders' Cup Classic races were incredibly deep. Take a look at the field that Swain ran third in his year, when Awesome Again won, Silver Charm was second, Victory Gallop and Gentleman and Skip Away were all in the field. Those aren't just grade 1 winners. Those are horses who, if not for another horse, would have been the champion of their division. It was that deep, or any others, the field that Cigar beat. On the sloppy track at Belmont Park, or even when he was third, narrowly beaten in Canada the following year. These are tremendously deep fields that we just don't get any longer. That's not to say it's not a great achievement, because, like we mentioned before, it's only been done once on the dirt. by a horse coming from another country outside of North America. And if he's going to be the second one to do it, well, I mean, that will be very exciting. His people are seeing something that we haven't seen over here, overlaying that form, that training onto our kind of racing in this country. Speed, for instance. I mean, come on. Are we going to see him go to the lead and run around out there on the front end? Has he ever gone in any of his races 3/4 of a mile in 1:10 or 1:11? Has he ever gone even a half mile in 46 or 47? Those are the kinds of fractions that he's going to be confronted with, and he's going to be well off those. And he's going to be back at a scrum of, 9 or 10, 11 horses, however many, and getting stuff thrown in his face that he's never. I had once had a trainer saying, the best way to train a European horse for a dirt race, don't worry about, their action or how they're doing. You just, every day, you take them out into the yard and you throw sand in his face for about 20 minutes and get him used to that. Sack him out so that it never bothers him again. Well, maybe O'Brien is doing that. That's very possible. He is quite literally a training genius. And the trial run at Southall did nothing to answer the question of whether he could handle what we call the kickback in this country. And the kickback is very, very stern. It's Del Mar is a heavyish dirt track, as all our California tracks are these days. And that when that stuff comes up, it hits you in the chest and the chin, and you're in amongst them. You better have a pretty determined horse to just be able to ignore that and run right on through it.
So from what you're saying, it will be difficult for City of Troy to get to the front early.
Impossible. There's one way. I'll tell you what it is. There's one way that you can. I would almost guarantee that you could get this horse to the front end if you replaced Ryan Moore with Mike Smith.
I don't think that's going to happen now.
Tell you, he'd be a good bet. He'd be a great bet then. No, Mike has that ability, uncanny ability to create a race on his own terms with a horse that has a lot of flexibility to his style. And I think if Ryan takes a page out of Mike Smith's very expansive book of success, he will be very attuned to the brake, and he'll get that horse on the engine through the stretch at Del Mar. It's a conventional stretch, it's a full, more than well over 1/4 of a mile to that first turn. And there's no reason on earth he can't be laying second or third outside whoever goes to the lead, whether it's Highland Falls or Fierceness will have speed, of course. I can't think of Arthur's Ride. Certainly, if he bounces back from his poor last race in the Gold Cup, he'll be on the engine as well. So he'll have plenty of company up there. But if City of Troy is as good as people think he is, Ryan will only need to keep him in the clear in the first rank on the outside. And if you can get that trip around the first turn and into the backstretch and be satisfied with being 4 or 5 horses wide turning into the short stretch at Del Mar, then we might see a pretty good show.
I won't ask my next question now, which was going to be, can he run wide? Could you just answer the question now?
Well, if he's good enough, I mean, you have to be that much better than the opposition that's getting a better trip, and that is accustomed to running down inside horses in dirt races. I'm sure that the field will bunch up pretty well around the far turn. There'll be a lot of movement forward, and depending on how fast the pace has been, some movement backward as well. I look at the horses that Aidan has brought over here before to run in the the Classic. 17 of them, as a matter of fact. George Washington twice, rest his soul. And you like to presume that he prepared each one of them to run the best race they possibly could under the circumstances of American dirt race. But the closest he'd ever been, other than, of course, Giant's Causeway, who, I mean, he could have run on ground glass going uphill. That's the kind of animal he was. It tells you just how good Tisdale was. But was, Declaration of War, who was a nice horse. Queen Anne winner. I think he won the Juddmonte or major race that summer. And he almost got the job done. So if those are the two horses that Aidan looks to as how I almost got it done in the past, and he's been training City of Troy accordingly, well, maybe it'll happen. But this idea that you're bringing over they're bringing over a super horse to be anointed with a 1.25 mile dirt race in California is a little bit preposterous at this point.
Yes, Declaration of War, third in 2013. He, like City of Troy, won the Juddmonte International, and that was his last race prior to the Breeders' Cup Classic. And of course, Declaration of War, his sire was a dirt horse, like City of Troy would justify.
Yes, I believe he was. Wasn't he out of a Rahi mare as well, which gave him dirt potential, top and bottom, bred in this country. So, there's a lot of reasons to think that he'll run very well. But we've seen also that City of Troy doesn't win off in all of his races. He makes the opposition look a little bit better than it maybe should be. So, you don't want to be too coy with some of these hard-boiled American runners, even though they're not household names. You have a horse like Highland Falls, who's coming to this race as good as a horse of his quality could come into it. You can't ever, write off a horse trained by Bill Mott in Arthur's Ride, and on like that. And then you have the interesting Japanese horses, all three of which have run very well at the top of the game in dirt races. It's a deep field and an interesting field. It isn't one of those world-beating fields that we've seen in the past, the Breeders' Cup Classic, but we're going to war with the field we have, and City of Troy had better bring his best game plus to win under these conditions.
Time for our final two guests, Kitty Trice, a Racing Post bloodstock journalist, and John Berry, a Newmarket trainer. He writes regularly on horse racing, a real student of the game, on the history of the sport as well. And let's hear what they both had to say.
It's quite interesting. People note that his sire obviously was a Triple Crown winner. He went on the dirt obviously extremely well, but he's out of a Gallo mare who won Filly's Mile and is a sister to an Oaks winner. So there's actually that side. That's the slight question, really, him taking to the dirt surface at Del Mar. But there's an interesting school of thought that this probably isn't the strongest American contingent lining up in the race itself, although I think something like the Japanese runner, Forever Young, could be a serious challenge, as he was third in the Kentucky Derby, and I think that's one of the best pieces of form on offer. I'd say City Troy is, at this stage, one of the rightful favourites, but there's enough in his pedigree to wonder if he doesn't break well, how will he take to the kick back? But it'll be interesting to see.
John, what are your thoughts on his progress this season on the turf?
Well, it's been terrific, particularly his progress this season, but bearing in mind that his first run of the season was atrocious and his last run was a career best and just an outstanding run by any standards. So, he's started the season taking a massive step backwards in the 2000 Guineas for whatever reason. Derby was very good. The Eclipse, I know he won it and wasn't totally convincing, but York was just outstanding.
So you think he's still improving?
He seems to be. Yeah, he seems to be. I know the Dewhurst was a very good run, and the Derby was a very good run. But I'd call his Judgment win his career his best performance. So yeah, it's exciting, and by all accounts, Aidan's very happy with him since. I wasn't at Southall when he went there, but Emma, my wife, was, and she was said he looked terrific. And I mean, we all saw that on the TV. You could tell nothing by, he might as well have been going around solo for how superior he ought to have been to his workmates. But I mean, he was massively superior to them. But no, he seems to be doing everything right, and hopefully he'll turn up on Breeders' Cup Classic Day in absolutely top form, which is really exciting.
With that in mind, what do you think are his chances then on the 2nd of November?
I think it's going to be hard to win. He may be the most talented horse in the race, may well be, but it's any sport. Home ground advantage. He hasn't got that, but it's not just that he's had to travel to another country. Forever Young will have had to travel to another country, but at least Forever Young is experienced on dirt, and I do think that counts for a lot. So I wouldn't rule out him winning, but I'd be pleasantly surprised if he did.
What is the difference then for a horse when they're running on the turf and then going to run on the dirt?
The kickback, absolutely atrocious. Really, really unpleasant. Unless you make all the running, obviously. And to make all the running on dirt is very hard, simply because every horse in the race wants to be pretty much up the front and out of the kickback. So it's hard to get to the front, and it's doubly hard in the early stages. It's doubly hard to get to the front without having done so much that you've done too much in the first half of the race. So yeah, I would be surprised if he makes the running, and it's just very, very, the kickback is terribly daunting until you're used to it. It varies depending on the conditions, and if it's nice weather, it probably won't be so bad, and it ought to be nice weather there. But we've all seen some American races where they come back as if they've just had shovelfuls of stuff coming out of a cement mixer thrown at them, and to gallop into that if you're not used to it is, well, it's a real test of mental strength as well as physical strength. And I mean, he probably is a mentally strong horse, but to do it when you're not used to it is hard. So yeah, he'll have to be the absolutely complete horse to win the race, i.e. not just the most talented, but an exceptionally resilient horse mentally as well as physically.
If he proves to be that, what do you think a win for City of Troy in the Breeders' Cup Classic will mean to racing?
Well, it'll be exciting for every European. I think everyone in Europe will be cheering him on, and it'll just be really good. It'll be a real feel-good factor. I mean, as regards racing in general, it won't really mean anything. The show will run on day to day, whether he wins or not. As regards American racing, there has been it was Arcong, wasn't it? The real outsiders won the race in the past. So, I mean, it won't be. I don't think it will be too much of a shock to Americans if he win it. They'll be able to cope with it. I think in the past there have been times when it's an overseas raider's come in and had an unprecedented win, and it's been a real jolt to the locals. In the same way that it probably was when Choisier won at Royal Ascot in 2003, and we thought, bloody hell, maybe our horses aren't automatically the best in the world. But yeah, I think the Americans will cope with it. So yeah, it'll just be lovely. It'll just be an exciting sporting moment. But ultimately, you get exciting sporting moments and the game goes on whether you get them or not. He's probably unlucky in that it looks quite a strong classic field this year. I mean, Fierceness is clearly a very, very good 3-year-old, as is Forever Young. Older horses to be, there'll be some tough older horses, probably not as great, but no, it's just wonderful that they're having a go. The easy way out, relatively speaking, would have been Breeders' Cup Classic, and I mean that is relatively speaking because it wouldn't. Breeders' Cup Turf. That would be an easy way out, but only relatively speaking, because that would be a tough assignment. But this is a bold thing, and when people are trying to launch stallions careers, we went through a phase of taking the easy way out all the way through and retiring them as soon as they'd done enough to be very popular. Cornwall definitely aren't doing that with this horse, and it's not been the Cornwall way in recent years. Witness the fact that August Rodin has been in training this year. A lot of them go back to the start very early as a century. High Chaparral stayed in training as a 4-year-old. You probably forget some of the ones that have been less successful as 4-year-olds. You almost forget that they have. But no, Cornwall give a lot. Cornwall do well out of the sport, but they give a lot to the sport as well. They race their very good horses more rigorously than once would have been the case. In the Vincent O'Brien years, we went through a regrettable period where once the horse had established his credential as a top horse and a top stallion prospect, you pretty much guarantee he'd never be seen again. In 1983, when Golden Fleece won the Derby with his head in his chest, no one was really that surprised when he didn't run again. But no, a horse wins the Derby and it's on to Wait for Age, and for an Aidan O'Brien horse, move on to Wait for Age Company. Once he proved themselves in Wait for Age Company, right? What's the next ambitious target? I just think it's great it's happening.
Jay, do you admire Aidan O'Brien for having a go, as John said?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, John hit all the right cylinders in that commentary, including a regret about early retirement, of which City of Troy is now in that category. It was very distressing to see a quote from Aidan O'Brien recently about it. We don't even know how much is under the hood, and we won't find out. I mean, we'll never know how good City of Troy really can be. This will be his crowning moment. It's also the sort of the definition of a no-lose situation. He's established himself as the finest 3-year-old on turf in the world. So you can take that to the bank. If he wins the classic on dirt, he's got that added value that is we'll wait and see how that can be marketed, but it won't take anything away from what he's done to this point. So it's we're the 3 Triple Crown winners, the 3 classic winners from the spring in America. One of them is showing up on the day, Seize the Gray, but he'll be running in the mile race on the dirt. Dornoch, an early retirement, our Belmont winner, our 1.25 mile Belmont winner, by the way, from the Saratoga Renault. And Mystic Dan, who is happily in training after a long break, and we're anxious to see how he comes out as a 4-year-old. I would have been very anxious to see, as we did with Auguste Rodin and other good 3-year-olds from Coolmore in recent years, what City of Troy could have done it for, because there were other hills that he could climb, certainly. But we don't get to see that. It will be it'll be very exciting. There's no question. And the Del Mar stable area will be very heavily tilted toward the Coolmore wing of the isolation barns for the next week or so as they go through their paces. And I'm anxious to see what else Aidan brings, because we know he always comes loaded for the grass races as well.
So putting you on the spot, do you think City of Troy will win the Breeders' Cup Classic?
If he can beat Highland Falls, he will. I would think that he'd be in the first four on form. I would think that the fierceness could be that late developing 3-year-old, even though he was life and death to beat a very, very good 3-year-old filly at Saratoga and the Travers. I think she'll walk her beat the Torpedo Anna in the distaff without too much trouble, unless Idiomatic is on her game. And but they're in a class by themselves, I think, as 3-year-olds, the Colt and the filly at this point. So yes, I think to John's point, it may be a little bit better field than some people think on paper. I'm not as impressed as some people are with it, but we have the winners of a lot of the major races. You can only hope for something like that. Highland Falls is very, very suited to the conformation of the Del Mar racetrack. He's got speed. He's got plenty of agility out of the gate, and he could go around there and just look like the winner every step of the way. But if City of Troy is parked on his hip, it'll be a heck of a race from the quarter pole to the wire.
So you're tipping City of Troy to come second then?
He could, if he can get in the clear, if he can use what pace he has to get into the clear and get away from the kickback. The idea of that John pointed out of the mental toughness for a horse who has never encountered that before is very key. You look at some of our great dirt horses that weren't, patented front runners, who would always sit behind horses and sit down in tight quarters and muscle their way through a hole when it opened or sit tight when it couldn't. They were all very tough-minded individuals, whether it was a Cigar or a Tisnow, or a horse like Ferdinand. Those were horses that they just didn't care what you threw at them. They were going to run their races no matter what. If City of Troy supposedly had some mental issues in the Guineas debacle, and was very, very modest in his eclipse. If he was having distracted days those 2 days, he'd better leave that in the locker room this time.
So it's Highland Falls for you. Have you got an outsider for us to look out for?
Well, yes. I think Bob Baffert has got a horse coming around very nicely at this point. Newgate, he had a good break after his adventures of last spring going to Dubai. Came back with a real good race in the California Crown. And there was the old Awesome Again stakes at Santa Anita in late September, and to just miss. And I think that he'll be right on the day for Baffert, who has a tendency to win the Classic more often than not when he has a live one. But Newgate will be a bit of a price. Again, I look for Arthur's Ride to bounce back from his Jockey Club Gold Cup. He's a maturing horse still. And I think that whatever Bill Mott has been able to put to him since that race has been only to his advantage to move forward and be more of the horse we saw in the Whitney.
And what do you think it will mean for world racing if a Son of Justify wins the Breeders' Cup Classic?
Well, I think Justify's his business won't suffer or be helped in any particular way. City of Troy's come along only once in a great while. I just hope it encourages people with good horses to run in the Breeders' Cup from any part of the world, and to truly make it the World Championships that it's attempted to advertise itself as for so many years. City of Troy's presence certainly helps that cause tremendously, whether he would have run on the turf or the Classic. just him being here is very important. Just as it would have been very important had Frankel showed up, or any of the other, top horses from England, Ireland, and France in the past couple of decades. But there's a lot of competition for the good horses this time of year, between the Kipco Champions Day and the Arc. And it's to their credit that horses can make those races and still have enough left in the tank to come over to be representative in the Breeders' Cup.
Thank you very much, Jay, for joining me on the show again. It's been a fascinating conversation. The eyes of the racing will be on Del Mar on Saturday, the 2nd of November.
Rightfully so. It's going to be a great day.
Will you be there?
You bet I'll be there from dawn till dusk.
Well, on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. A pleasure.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.